everybody. Welcome to fmtraining.tv. My name is Margaret. I'll be your broadcast engineer for today. I hope you all are having a lovely day. I'm here with the wonderful Wim Decorte. I'm also here with Richard Carlton, who's chilling out in the background for a bit. We are continuing our ongoing series with Wim, which he has been gracious enough to give us 5 days. I'm just talking about his schedule. Man is busy. But we are continuing our discussion on AI. AI is probably the biggest feature of FileMaker 2025/22 that has been released, and it is a really complicated topic because now there's enough features that people really want to begin using it with their FileMaker databases, but there's a lot to know and understand, and so Wim is here to explain that to us. Todd will also be doing the same thing next week. So if you don't understand one explanation, you should probably understand the next explanation. We are literally, they'll be adding their own spin and covering their own specialized topics, but the reason we're covering this twice is because, one, it's that important, and two, if you don't get it once with one teacher, you'll probably get it with another teacher. It's the way it goes. Anyway, welcome people. Good to see you all here. Hope you're having a lovely day. All right. I'm kind of eager to get started, so I think I'm going to wrap this up real fast. Hi, Wim. What are we doing today?
We are going to continue from where we left off yesterday. So if any of you were here yesterday and you have any remaining questions, shoot them Margaret's way. Just like yesterday, we want to make this as interactive as possible. Don't sit on your questions because that's really why we're here, right? Like I mentioned this yesterday, we're all at the beginning of this AI journey. Some of us are a little further ahead, but fundamentally, we're all at the beginning of this AI journey. So now's the time to get all of the fundamentals right and make sure that we have a solid understanding of what it is that we're talking about. I mentioned this yesterday. I tried to skip all of this months ago when I first got into this and started playing with this. Figured like I didn't need to know all those fundamentals, and then I started making connections with AI models, and it did things, and I could sort of understand why, but it left me feeling uneasy that I didn't get the fundamentals. And then when I was searching, they were using terms, and I didn't understand what the terms were. I was making assumptions about what those terms were. So all of that said, like, if you have a question, now is the time to come forward and say, raise your hand and pose a question. Did we
Yes.
have any remaining questions from yesterday, Margaret? Anything that we didn't cover?
No, I'll reread the one that you said you wanted to like talk about the beginning, which was from Marcel. We are currently using OpenAI's Assistant API from FileMaker. We create a thread from an email's content and run different pre-configured assistants on that thread like a Swiss Army knife. Can the generate response from model function be used for this, or is it strictly limited to the chat endpoint?
Yep. Yep. Actually, I'll skip ahead to that question and then I'll come back because the fundamentals about this are really important to get to. So let me share my screen and I'll jump to that. And I'll answer the question in detail and as I'm going through that. Right. So this is sort of where we left off yesterday. I'll come back to this. I want to skip ahead to here. Actually, let me stop here first, and then I'll go to the other one.
Mhm.
So forget about the heading, the local LLM. Actually, that's the wrong one. I need it to be. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It'll make itself clear. And actually, what a dumbo I am! I can show it in the real thing. So when we're talking about here is this script step, which is the most generic of the AI script steps that we have. This is the one that will talk to a text generation model, a chat model, right? For lack of a better term. Yesterday, we covered all the distinction between all the models. Talking to a text generation model is the newest thing in FileMaker 22. So this is what this is all about.
Okay, real fast. Does this script step only talk to text generation models?
This one does, yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, there are other script steps for generating embeddings and doing that semantic search thing. Most of these we've had in FileMaker 21.0 and 21.1, but this one specifically is for chat models, right? And I mentioned yesterday that the script step is really just nothing more than a fancy wrapper around the insert from URL, right? And that may surprise some of you. So I'll give a hint to the answer that we're asked here. The options available, and we'll go over most of these today, actually, to tell you what they mean. These are the options that talking to a chat or a text generation model, these are the things that are exposed. We have something like tool definitions and tool calling, function calling. I'll cover that today. If I interpret the question correctly, the question seems to be more about agentic AI, right? Where because you're talking about actions that are being taken, interaction with other systems by sending email, parsing through emails, that kind of thing. That is not supported by the script step. So that should be the short answer to the question, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't do it, right? That's the next thing, because once you understand that the script step is just a wrapper around the insert from URL, and you see that in action. Let me jump back to my slides and make that clear. All right. So what I'm showing on the screen here is Insomnia, same as Postman. We just use Insomnia as our Postman-like tool within Soliant. That script step, generate response from model, fundamentally under the hood does no different than this. And this is a regular API call, like all the other API calls that we ever make. There's a REST endpoint that we talk to. And because it's this one is OpenAI compatible, that means that the endpoint is V1 chat completions. That's the standard OpenAI endpoint for talking to a text generation model, right? It doesn't matter what provider it is. If they're OpenAI compatible, the endpoint will look like that. It's just abstracted away in that script step, right? Like nowhere do we need to configure this. It's just hard coded in the script step. It knows that either you picked OpenAI as the provider or you picked a local model as the provider, which is also OpenAI compatible. Then it knows that it needs to construct that particular URL, right? All the way from HTTPS to chat completions, and it knows it's a post.
Okay, so it'll construct the URL for you in that script step instead of you having to do that. That doesn't mean that you can't go construct the URL yourself using insert from URL, right?
You can, right? Like everything that's here, because fundamentally, actually, let me go back to Postman real quick and do from there. So this is Postman. So if I go to chat to OpenAI, right? So in this case, the URL is openai.com, but it's the same V1 chat completions. If I talk to my own model, it's going to be the same thing, except instead of API openai.com, it's going to point to wherever my model is hosted. Fundamentally, and most of us have been doing API integrations for a while now. We're intimately familiar with curl because the insert from URL script step in FileMaker is nothing more than curl. So anything that you can do with these FileMaker script steps, you can do with the plain old insert from URL script step. It's just a curl call, right? You know it's a post. You know what the endpoint is. You have your headers that you want to do. All of that good stuff. It's just there. So to answer that second part of the question is the generate response from model does not do agentic AI. It does some tool calling, as I mentioned, and we'll cover that, but it doesn't do integrations with an MCP server, which is really at the heart of all agentic AI these days. But you can do it with insert from URL, right? So the fact that Claris hasn't given us the tools or the pre-built tools, if you will, to do that kind of stuff doesn't mean that we cannot do it. We can, right? Because fundamentally, and I know that I'm repeating myself, but it is kind of fundamental. All of these script steps under the hood do nothing but this, right? They translate what the combination of settings that you have, they create a curl call and they send it out. That's really all that there is to it, right? So if I go back to here, and if I now marry that, what we see on the screen to what FileMaker gives us, right? So the generate response from model, by virtue of you having used the configure AI account first, and it's in the configure AI account script step where you pick your provider, and there's 4 choices: OpenAI, Cohere, Anthropic, and local, right? Depending on which one you've picked, and in my case, I picked local because you can see here at the endpoint is a custom URL instead of just saying OpenAI. by virtue of that, it knows how to create that URL that you're going to be sending the request to. Right? So that's step number one. The other thing is the prompt that you're sending, the question, the thing that you're typing into the chat window, right? That's called the prompt. And we'll cover prompt and prompt engineering in a little bit. That basically gets wrapped into a nice JSON structure, like you see here. That's the payload or the body that is going to be sent to the API. And the format for that, again, in this case, is OpenAI compatible, meaning that's the way that OpenAI does it. Their documentation is free for everybody to see, and many other providers have followed the same thing because it's easy if we can follow a standard. Now, Anthropic does it slightly differently. It is what it is, but we wouldn't have to worry about, because in that configure AI account, if you picked Anthropic, then the generate response from model script step would know what format to wrap your question in. And it would also know how to parse the result, because that's the final step, right? The response from the model is going to be JSON, just like with all of the other APIs that we ever dealt with. It's going to be JSON, and inside that JSON there, you can see the content. That's the response from the model. There's some other good stuff in there, some of it that we'll cover there too. See in the response the usage node that's at the bottom there with prompt tokens, completion tokens, and total tokens. We'll come back to that, but that's useful information for us to know. Right?
Okay.
So talking to an AI model, wherever it's hosted, is exactly like any other API call that we've ever made. And hopefully that demystifies it a bit, where you go like, huh, so if I see something that I want to do with one of the APIs that these AI providers give me, but I can't do it with the script steps, I don't see how they fit into the script steps that Claris gives us, turn to the insert from URL. Because fundamentally, it's just curl. You'll see the curl in their documentation. You deconstruct it, you feed it to the insert from URL, and away you go. There's one caveat to that.
Okay, what's the caveat?
It's I think it's a small caveat. If you ever worked with ChatGPT and you ask it a question, or Claude for that matter, and you ask it a question and it's kind of a complex answer, so it takes a while,
Mm-hmm.
you can see it's sort of like typing, right? Where it's like it builds the response as you see it. That is called streaming. Um, Streaming is supported by this generate response from model script step. It is not supported by the generic insert from URL.
Oh, okay. So you might have a longer wait time, or the customer might be feeling like, oh, it's taking forever to get a response because they can't see it being streamed back to them.
Spot on, right? Like the responsiveness of the answer may feel a little delayed because it's got to collect that answer first, and then when it has the full answer, it'll send this response instead of sending the response piecemeal, which is called streaming. Under the hood, there's something called server-side events, or SSE, which is a very specific, I guess I'm going to simplify, call it part of HTTPS, or the protocol that the insert from URL doesn't support. But the modified insert from URL that's underneath this generate response from model does support it.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So something to keep in mind from a user endpoint. You'd have to let them know that you're getting a response.
Yeah, exactly. It's a user experience thing. Like nothing breaks. Like fundamentally, it'll work.
Mm-hmm.
It may just feel not what you used to if you're used to talk to Claude or ChatGPT, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Uh, Quick question about insert from URL. Do we have access to the APIs from local models? We want to use the insert from URL.
You do you? Yes. Uh, I don't want to waste time by looking for it, but let me do a quick example of that. No, that's not that. That's my server that I want to show in a bit. Go back to Insomnia. Um, you can see here on the left-hand side, I have chat with Bedrock. I'll cover that later. Bedrock is an
Mm-hmm.
AWS serverless AI model host. Why it's important, I'll cover that later. And then
Mm-hmm.
I have chat with OpenAI and chat with Anthropic. I also have these three get models from Anthropic, Bedrock, and OpenAI, and I have this get models local, right? So this Mac Studio, that's my own Mac Studio that is running my own local models. I'll use it a lot in the rest of the days to show you how to deploy the Claris AI model server.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that I'm using V1 models, right? So most of the embedding, chat, and then utility. Let's call it a utility endpoint, like models. Like if you want to know what models are available on that server, you can, and again, this is OpenAI standard endpoints. You can use your local LLM host to say, okay, uh, what models do I have host? And then you get that response. That doesn't mean that the full OpenAI API model is covered by the local LLM. It is not, right? Like it's because it's built by Claris, targeted towards supporting the script steps that we currently have in Claris. It doesn't support the full OpenAI thing. Jumping ahead to probably Thursday, right? Maybe tomorrow if we get to that. Again, it's not because it doesn't seem that it's possible with the Claris AI model server that you're dead in the water with your integrations from inside FileMaker with that, right? You don't have to use the Claris AI model server. You can use a different kind of local AI model server if you want to. And I'll give you some examples later. Or you can use Bedrock. If you want to put it in the cloud, but still keep it under secure and privacy guardrails that you want to put on there, you can still do that. So a lot of my answers are twofold, if you will, right? Where I'm saying the Claris script steps and the Claris AI model server supports this, and it's a bit in a box, if you will. That doesn't mean that you're dead in the water. Like you can still use a lot of the other stuff from inside FileMaker because it's all an API call, right? And there's other local servers, AI model servers that support a wider range of the Open AI API spec.
Yep, they said thank you, so they considered their question answered.
All right. Let me backtrack through this one real quick and go to, we just covered that, so never mind me. I wanted to show you this as a quick example of the difference between OpenAI at the top and Anthropic at the bottom. Right. So two of the providers supported by the Claris script steps. Um, and you can see if you look at the URL, right? The OpenAI spec says if you want to talk to a chat model, it's V1 chat completions. That's sort of like the endpoint. Anthropic, usually Claude models, they use V1 messages, right? So a difference in what that looks like. The payload, the body, is exactly the same in this case. The response, however, is not, right? Again, on if you use the default FileMaker script steps, you don't need to worry about that, right? The script steps are coded to know which provider you're using. They know how to parse. They know what endpoint to talk to. But if you're thinking about using your own integrations, using insert from URL, these are the kind of things you need to be aware of, right? Like don't use the OpenAI spec and formats if you're going to deploy against the Claude and Anthropic, right? I haven't checked Cohere, but it wouldn't surprise me that Cohere has its own way of doing that if they're not using an OpenAI. So as you're developing and testing and you want to switch between model providers and you're doing everything yourself, these are the sort of like the considerations to keep in mind, right? So the endpoints are slightly differently, and the way that the response gets to you is different. Not widely different. This is at the end of the day, it's still all JSON. We know how to parse these, so we can certainly do that.
Which is something to be aware of. That makes sense.
Indeed. And I showed you this. This is at fundamentally, it's all a curl call, right? And there's plenty of examples from all of these providers that will tell you how to do this. I mentioned this, right? That's the caveat. I want to revisit it real quickly. If you use the insert from URL generic script step, you don't have streaming. Streaming is one of the options that you do have when you use the newer script steps in FileMaker 22. It's really only relevant for longer responses, right? But it's kind of nice from a from a user experience point of view. That if you have that.
Oh yeah, it's like the most reactive loading bar ever. You literally see it generating the response.
Indeed. Right. So yesterday we left off with parameters and dimensions. Today I want to talk about. So yesterday was pretty much all talking about models, right? And we're not
Hmm.
quite done with models, because all models that you find out there are trained on data, and because it's like the solutions that we build, right? Like we go through a development phase and then we do a go live, and that's it, right? Like it's fixed in time until we go back in and change it. Models
Hmm.
are the same thing, right? Like remember, a model is just a binary file with lots of numbers in it, but it's static as of a certain point in time. So keep that in mind. So it's trained on generic data. I'll come back to the point in time stuff in a little bit, but it's based on a lot. Like, don't get me wrong, it's trained on I was going to say a bad word, um, load of data. Um,
That you're good.
it's trained on a bunch of generic data. Keep that in mind. What it really means is that it's not trained on your data, right? It's trained on what's available on the internet in anything that's open, not licensed. Although clearly there's some questions about models bypassing copyrights and that kind of stuff. We won't get into that. Um, but it is not trained on anything that is specific to you. Um, there are two ways to do that, right? There's probably more ways of doing that, but there's two ways that Claris provides to us in the new functionality in FileMaker 22, and they're right there at the bottom, right? So we can, oops, it's not at the bottom. It's over here. We can fine tune a model, or we can do RAG. Both of these are ways of supplementing what the model knows with data that you have that is really specific to your business, your knowledge base, your catalogs, anything that is relevant to your business. You can give that to a model to work with, so that in addition to everything that it's trained on, it will now have knowledge of the stuff that is important to you. RAG stands for retrieval augmented generation, because we're still talking about generating answers. And a little segue, of all the functionality that we have, Perform RAG is the only one that needs two types of models. Right? Keep that in mind, because all the other stuff, semantic search, is all about embedding, meaning you need either a text embedding model or an image embedding model, but that's it, right? Chatting with text with a text generation model is all about interacting with the text generation model, but RAG is different. You need to embed the data that you're sending so that the model would know what to do with that. Because at the end of the day, remember that the model is that big spreadsheet with cells and numbers. You got to represent your own data in the same format. Otherwise, it doesn't know how to read it.
Oh, okay. I was like, okay, why would it need both? That makes sense.
Yep. Yep. So it can't read a PDF that you're sending. It's not like us. We go like and read and go like, okay, what's relevant in here? We gotta speak to the model in its own language, which is numbers, right? So
Got it. Okay, so that's why you need to convert all your data into a text embed and then give it to the model.
yep, yep, pretty much. So when you do the add data action and I'll show you that in the FileMaker scripts a little later, but the add data action to basically give data to the model, that is basically embedding it as it goes for storage on the server, whether that's a provider server or your own server. We'll get to that. And then when you send prompts, when you start asking questions, then it's back to the normal talking to the text generation model part.
Okay, that makes sense. A quick question from someone. Models are the trained data.
Correct. Correct. So we have two ways of supplementing, providing our own data, fine-tuning and RAG. The difference between the two, it's a very different mechanism under the hood, but fundamentally, the difference between the two is fine-tuning a model changes the model. you're fundamentally changing the model. You're taking a model, a base model is what it's called, and you're changing its inner wiring. You start rewriting some of these cells in the spreadsheet.
Interesting. Okay.
So
So
at
like
the end of the
what?
day, yeah, go ahead.
So like by rewriting it, do you mean like it's going to associate for your business, I don't know, Bella with cat more strongly because I have a cat named Bella in my business?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. You're changing its not so much its rules, but its associations is a good way. And I think your example is actually pretty a pretty good analogy, right? You're changing some of its wiring so that the outcome will be different versus the original base model.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
So when you fine tune a model, you end up with a new copy of the model that is no longer the same as the original model.
Okay.
Um, and that has consequences. There's a couple of consequences, right? Because if you want to change out the base model, like if you use the Gemma 3 model as the base model and you start changing it, now you have your own copy of the Gemma 3 model. If Google comes out with Gemma 4, you can't just swap it out, right? You have to redo your training on the new Gemma 4 to end up with the Gemma 4 bits.
Oh, okay. So each time you want to upgrade the model, you have to fine tune again. Okay.
Yes, and fine tuning is specialized activity, and it requires a fair bit of compute resources, much more so than RAG, right? With RAG, because that's the difference with RAG. With
Mm-hmm.
RAG, you're saying I'm leaving the original model alone, but build me a separate database that is adjacent to the model with my stuff, right?
Okay.
You're not changing the model. You're just pointing the model at where it can find additional information.
Okay. So a question about that. Wouldn't you only fine tune the once though? Like you update the model and then you fine tune it and then it shouldn't require any extra computing power, or are you fine tuning it every time you make a call?
No, no. The fine tuning is a bulk one-time operation, but
Okay.
it's a really expensive operation.
Oh, okay. So even though it's only one time, it costs a lot. Got it. Okay. That
Yep.
makes sense.
Yep. And we'll cover the system specs, the system requirements as we go along. But this is a good time to say it. Fine-tuning a model in the with the Claris functionality right now is only possible on Apple hardware. Very likely they'll start supporting it on Windows and Linux, but for now it's on Apple hardware only. And the reasons why will become clear as we go along.
Got it.
Right? So two ways to add your own data to a model, fine-tuning it or doing RAG. I think 99% of us are just going to be using RAG because it's easy. You don't need to spend a lot of compute power. You can add data easily, change, remove data, because we really have three actions with RAG: but adding your data, removing your data, or asking it questions. And it's really simple. I'll show you a FileMaker example as when we get to that. Models are trained on data, and because they have a point in time, this is me coming back to that point in time stuff. Uh, because they are point in time, it's like a version of something, right? This is Gemma 3 was released at a particular date and time, so it was based on data that precedes that. Uh, However, data and anything that comes with that, the data set that it was trained on, which is a wide variety of data, the data keeps on changing, right? So this is called model drift, where the model is, for lack of a better term, it's stuck in time, right? It only knows what it's trained on. If the outside world changes, then you ask it a question and it answers with 2-year-old data,
Okay. Which isn't
right?
great.
Yeah. So that's called model drift, where the accuracy of the answer isn't wrong necessarily, right? The answer it gives is correct based on the data that it's trained on, but it may not be correct on the current data. Um, a good example of that, I think that will make that very clear. We know that people's habits change a lot during COVID, right?
Hmm.
So if you have a model that is trained predominantly, like most models, on pre-COVID data, because that's the vast majority of history, um, but you're asking it a question that say that there was a model that got released just before COVID, right?
Hmm.
And you ask it a question about people's behaviors for buying stuff, right? The answer that you would get wouldn't be relevant in the post-COVID world because people's behaviors and the way that they do things and what they do has vastly changed since COVID.
Hmm.
So that's a good example of why a model with a particular point in time reference may not be relevant for the questions that you're asking it today.
Okay, that makes sense. So how often would you update a model then to avoid severe drift?
Nobody knows because this is us being at the beginning of the journey, right? Um,
That's true.
I'll, I have a slide in here. We'll come to that slide probably in three, four slides that I think are skills that we all need to develop that will make us that are relevant for using and building our solutions with AI in mind, right? So
Hmm.
I'll answer that question in a bit.
Got it.
Um, right. So this speaks to that degradation of the machine learning's performance because of real world changes, right? So keep that in mind.
Real
The other
quick.
thing that is somewhat related to that is if I ask the model, what's the weather in Antwerp today? Because I want to go see the Panache statue. Do I need to bring an umbrella or my sunscreen? That kind of thing. There's no model in the world that can answer that question, right? Because there's no model that is trained to include what kind of weather it is today, right?
Oh, yes, that makes perfect sense. That's funny
However,
though.
if you ever chatted with ChatGPT or with Claude, this is the kind of question that you can ask it, right? So how does that work? Um, how that works is called tool calling or function calling, where you can tell the model, I have a question for you, and if there are parts of that you don't know how to answer, here are a couple of tools you can use, right? For instance, if I'm asking about the weather, go check this weather API, right? And then the model will be smart enough from your answer with that context, that word guessing that we were talking about yesterday, to say, I detect in this sequence of words that you give me that Antwerp is a city, and you're asking about the weather. I'll go call this weather API with and ask it about the weather in Antwerp, right? And then from that response, which now gets added to that context that the model is aware of, it can then guess what the answer should be. Make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Okay, because I yes, that there's some stuff I've seen now that retroactively make a lot of sense. I'm like, okay, well, there's tools, but tools are cool. But why are they cool? Because they give the AI access to information it wouldn't have because it's caught in a moment in time. Okay, got
Yep.
it.
Yep. And the FileMaker script steps allow for tool calling. Um, we'll get to it. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but we'll get to it. The you can, and there's a couple of different ways. You can tell it to do an execute SQL. You can tell it to run a custom function, things like that, right? So you can provide extra information when you make a call to the model to say, here are my list of tools that you can use to help you generate a proper answer. I've shown this slide already before, but I want to anchor the knowledge that we have up to this point, right? So we know the rows in this table are the pieces of functionality that Claris gave us in FileMaker 22. The columns are the different types of models that we talked about and how they function. So we should be largely on the same page about what that looks like. And the checkboxes really will help you think about if you want to use a particular piece of FileMaker functionality, what kind of models are you be using, right? So that you can then figure out what models to go hunt for.
Which makes sense. We do have some quick questions real fast, if you don't
Sure.
mind grabbing them about fine tuning. Will fine tuning confuse the embedding?
In the sense that if you if you used a non-fine-tuned model to generate embeddings and whatnot, and then you go change the model, which is what you're doing with fine-tuning, uh, then there is the potential for confusing it. It's not a huge potential. By the way, fine-tuning only applies to text generation models, right? So you cannot fine-tune a text embedding or image embedding model. Um, and embeddings largely are for those embedding models. So it's like most, it depends is the answer. If I strip away the nuance in the answer is no.
And then some clarification questions. If an AI is like a spreadsheet program, a model is the content of the spreadsheet? Question mark.
Fair enough, right? Yesterday we said that the model, the bulk of the model is what I would call the spreadsheet, right? With rows and columns and numbers in the cells but the model also additionally has these JSON config files that whoever wants to use the model give an explanation about what the model is, how to use it, that kind of thing, right? So instructions for using the model are also part of the model, if you will. But the bulk of the model is just that, right? A ton of numbers.
Fine tuning is like converting a regular car into a running car? I mean, I would say more like a customized car, right?
A customized car, yep, yep. Where you start fiddling with the engine, right? Like I said, I'm going to give it more power, or change the gear ratios, stuff like that, right?
Okay, and then
Can
we
I
have
ask a quick question? So
yes.
on the fine tuning, and maybe I don't understand this, but it seems to me like when we deal with models, if we have a model that has specific expertise, say you have a model that is based in legal, has more of a legal background, or a model that has a medical background, is that where you would customize the model to be more centric to that vertical market? Is that the fine tuning part we're talking about?
What you're talking about, and you're right. Like if you look at some of the Google models, there are models that the big providers pre-train on verticals. Like there are medical models, right? There's legal models, that kind of thing. Um, this kind of fine tuning that we would do would probably not go in that direction, right? Because where would we get the body of data to cover all of the medical field, right? It would be more like, here's my business specific data, right? Like here's my catalog of stuff, or here's my knowledge base, my customer service knowledge base, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but basically we're tuning the model to some sort of specific skill
Yeah.
set or knowledge base, even if it's with your own organization, right? So
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So for everyone, just think about it, taking a generic model and tuning it to understand what the hell your business needs are, whatever those are, right? So
Exactly. If we want to put the right terms on it, any model that comes out of the box, unless it's like a pre-trained medical model, but like a generic model, is just that, it's generic. Anything that we add fine tuning is to some degree a specialization that we're adding to it. Tokens. Tokens are the unit of measure for dealing with the OpenAI, sorry, not the OpenAI, with the AI model providers, whether they're commercial or your own. You still have to worry about tokens. Well, actually, a little less when you host your own model, because then you don't care how many tokens you consume, because you have the hardware and all of these things. But even then, I would highly recommend that you keep track of the tokens, and I'll explain why. Right. So this is Anthropic, right? They all do the same, whether it's Anthropic or OpenAI or Cohere, they will charge you by the token. And there's two types of tokens. We'll get to that. There's input tokens and there's output tokens. And as you can see, well, actually, they charge you by the million of tokens, but you can see the price here. And it really depends on the model. The newer the model, the bigger the model, the more expensive it is, right? So the Opus 4 is the most recent Claude. That's a huge model, right? And it's also expensive. The Sonnet one is sort of like more run-of-the-mill one, and the Haiku is a smaller one. And you can see the difference in price per million of tokens, right? So the Opus is 5 times the Sonnet. So keep that in mind, right? So although I'll get to that in a sec, cost is not the main consideration for not going with a commercial provider versus doing your own, hosting your own model, right? Because if you host your own model, you still have cost, because you have to buy a server that's capable, or renting a server for that matter, that is capable of giving you the performance that you need, right? So if you look at AWS Bedrock, who can basically host pretty much the same models as most of the commercial providers, you can see their price there too, right? So they express it by thousand of tokens. At the end of the day, you can do the math and compare the two. But tokens are the like I said, the unit of measure. And I mentioned that there's input and output tokens. Input tokens, that's clear. That's the length of the stuff that you send it to work with. And Mitzi is changing my slides for me.
I was trying to stop Bella from accidentally causing a broadcast issue earlier. You're good. Okay.
So let me define a token a bit. If we have a sentence has words. That's how we humans understand the stuff that we're dealing with, right? Tokens are not words. Tokens can be words, or they can be part of a word. That's sort of like the complicating factor. So if you have 5 words in a sentence, you're going to have 5 or more tokens, right? It's not going to be 500 tokens either. It's going to be kind of depends on how long the word is, but you may have 5, 6, 7 tokens for a sentence with 5 words in it.
Okay, so they split words based up on length, I assume? Or is it
Largely,
other fact?
yeah,
Yeah, okay.
largely.
Got it.
Largely. FileMaker has given us 2 get functions, that new ones, right? That we can use to help us with that. There's the get token count, which is a very simple one. You can that's probably I probably have some typos in that one, but the get token count will give you the number of tokens in any word or sentence that you give it. And that's something that you can do, like it doesn't do anything beyond that. It just calculates the number of tokens based on whatever the token math algorithm is.
Okay, so is that algorithm universal? Like it doesn't change between models?
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. Yep. I probably should have looked it up so that I can put it on here and look smart, but I don't know. I don't know what it is. And then there's the second get function that is that will give you the tokens that were used by your last interaction with the AI model, right? And that one of the 2, that one is the more interesting one because that one will tell you how many tokens you've just used. And if you keep a sort of like a running tally of that, you can calculate the cost of what this would cost you if you interacted with a commercial provider or with something like Bedrock, which is more private and more secure. So as you're experimenting and as you're developing, that would be a good thing to build into your solutions where every time you make a model call, that you know how many tokens you've used, right? Because it's the prime tool that will let you do that extrapolation to say, if I run through my scenarios, I've developed this, I can then do X times based on user load, right? And then you can more accurately calculate how much your AI integration is going to cost you.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
So
an
it's important
step.
yeah, it's an important thing.
There we go. We have any token questions? Okay, hold on. It's input versus output. Does it give both as they're different prices?
Yes, absolutely. Right. So if I have it here. So this is my Insomnia chatting to OpenAI. It tells you this, right? They don't all have this prompt token details kind of thing, but FileMaker always gives you the first 3, right? The prompt tokens, that's your input, right? How long was your prompt? And we'll define prompt actually on the next couple of slides, but how long was your prompt? And then how many tokens for the stuff that you got back, the response, right? And then the sum of that really is your total tokens. So yes, you get them split up because they do have different prices for both. And that brings us to prompts, right? The prompt is the input, the question that you ask. And again, we're talking about, in this case, about a chat model, a text generation model, right? So we have an input like, here's something that I wanted you to do, right? Analyze this review, and then the review that I got in quotes, which is really asking the model to do sort of like a sentiment analysis on this, right? That's sort of like the expected response that I want. But this is a prompt. This is me asking a question. There's this thing called prompt engineering, and you will need to know this. You will need to become good at that, right? Because it's something that you add to the inputs to provide details about what exactly you want the model to do with what the users are giving it, right? And in the script step, it's called instructions for whatever reasons. I wish that we would stick with what everybody else calls it, but it is what it is. Um, so it would look something like this, right? Where it's still the same prompt, right? The fourth bullet, now analyze this review, that's the actual prompt. So imagine that's what the users are typing in. Behind the scenes, as a developer, you're providing the first two bullets, where the user doesn't see that, but it's going to be part of the script step that executes the call to the model, where you provide extra guidance for the model. And it could be anything, right? It could be, if you're going to give me a CSV, I want these columns. If you give me back JSON, here's an example of the structure of the JSON that I would expect. Or it could be the opposite, where you say, here's an example of the JSON input and what it all means, right? So that's called prompt engineering, where you provide extra information, and it's really all meant to make sure that the response from the model is as accurate as you want it to be, right? So that's really what it is.
Got it. Okay. And like I assume there's a certain trick to actually engineering the prompt in a way to get the response you're looking for.
Yes, there's actually whole courses that you can take on prompt engineering.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yep. What it means is more tokens, right? Because you're just made your prompt so much longer.
Oh, because the AI is getting the whole thing. It's both getting what the
Yes,
user is
indeed.
saying and what you're sending. Okay.
Yes, indeed. If I go back real quick to the pricing scheme here, before I go back to this one, see this thing, right?
Oh,
So there are ways that you could tell the provider, because you're not talking to the model at this point. You're talking to the provider to say, I don't want to be sending the same instructions over and over because it's costing me an arm and a leg at this point. Like, go ahead and cache some of these extra prompts for me, and they'll charge you for storing them. But then every call to the model will get cheaper.
okay. So I'm guessing that writing is the storage, so you pay that per million tokens, and then reading it every time when it needs to read it will be an extra 150 instead of
Yep.
whatever cost it was. Okay.
Yep. And so you have to calculate how long your extra prompts are versus whether it makes sense to ask the provider or to use the functionality from the provider to do this. But it's one way that you can keep your cost down if you're using a commercial provider. Now, AWS, I actually haven't looked at whether they have something like that. They must, but they have something else called batch. Right? Um, batch Batch would shift the interaction with the text generation model away from, I'm asking a question, I'm getting a response right away, right? Maybe you have a bunch of prompts questions that you want to ask the model, but you don't need the answer right away. Maybe you can just bundle a bunch of these questions and have it work at it and give you the response when it's done, asynchronously.
Okay.
Um, and because you're giving the model host provider more flexibility as to when exactly they calculate this, like it doesn't need to be in the next milliseconds, the next second is fine for me. It allows them to balance their resource usage a little better, so they give you a discount for that.
That's actually pretty handy. Okay.
Right? So that's something to keep in mind as we get into these things where we are worried about the cost.
Oh, speaking of cost things, tokens are taxed for the amount of data sent/received.
Yep, that's a fair way to put it. This is that slide that I mentioned earlier on. There are a couple of key skills around AI, beyond what we're doing here this week and next week with Todd about the fundamental understanding. Beyond that, there are some skills that I see that we will all need to develop over time to become good developers for all things AI. We just must. One of them, we're going to talk about a lot about that tomorrow, and then Thursday and Friday, is you need to understand your deployment choices, what they mean, how you do it, all of these things. I think that's a bit of an obvious one. This one may not be so obvious, right? Your data needs to be ready. If you're going to send some of your data to the model to analyze or to use as RAG data to get some answers from, your data needs to be at least consistent, right? I know that a lot of FileMaker solutions that we see have, well, we'll call it crappy data, right? Because the data structure changed over time. We don't always properly validate the inputs for the data, so that kind of stuff. So we got to be aware that if you have crappy data, the answers that you get when you provide that data to a model may not be as consistent or as accurate as we think they should be, right? So that's something that we'll have to keep in mind. So it wouldn't surprise me for some of the bigger projects that we do around AI that we have to do some data cleanup in the process, or at least some data inspection before we call it that it's in a good enough state.
Okay, that makes sense, and not something that I'd considered.
Yep.
Because, yeah, like
The
orphan
other
records
one,
and things like that. Okay.
yeah, the other one is this AI validation and AI evaluation. And with AI evaluation, I talk about testing different models and understanding the difference in performance between them, but also that model drift that I talked about, right? At what point is the data that the model is trained on becoming too stale for you to use? And it's not a now problem, right? Like it's not a problem for this week, next month, 6 months down the road, a year down the road, probably, right? So how would you know? Like how are you going to test the responses that you get from the model, whether they're still accurate or valid or plausible, reliable, right? Like how are you going to do that?
Hmm.
And if I bring it one step closer, we've all seen Ronnie's demo at Engage where he was chatting and the AI produced a report from that. How do you know that's accurate?
How do you actually double check the information it's given you?
Yep, yep. When we develop solutions that depend on AI for these kinds of results, we have to have a way. That's called AI validation, by the way. And again, there's a whole science behind that already. You can buy products that will help you with this. So it's something. Um, but clearly, as FileMaker developers, we need to start thinking about that, right? If I and it could be as simple as we do enough test runs where we feed it test data that we know, right? That we know exactly what it is, so that we know how to test for that. To some extent, it's almost like writing unit tests for your code, right? Where you give it a fixed input, you expect a fixed output, and you can run these tests in an automated fashion to validate that the result is accurate. But we got to start thinking about this now, right? Because more so than when we write like hard-coded reports, where like what it's all based on FileMaker queries and stuff like that. This is something different, right? It may feel like it's largely the same, but it isn't, right? Like we still need to build in that extra step.
Yeah. Well, I could see a really easy way of getting yourself into some serious trouble if you don't actually validate what you're getting back.
Exactly, because dashboards and reporting are such an obvious use case for using AI quickly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If businesses start making decisions based on the dashboards that you provided and they're all wrong,
Yeah. I don't
cringe,
like
right?
that. Yes.
Yeah, cringe. And then finally, prompt engineering. We just talked about this, right? It's a science and an art in itself, how to supplement data, because a lot of these things are going to be exposed to the end users, right? And it's going to be rare that two different end users will come up with the right, properly formatted question that will give you the answer, the consistent answer. If you have two people doing the exact same workflow, right? Will they get the same results if they ask the question in their manner to the AI model? Probably not, right? So again, that falls on us developers to make sure that we put some guardrails around that by enhancing the prompts that the users will use, and that's called prompt engineering. So these are the skills that I see that we will start to need to develop relatively soon.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and the final bit for today, we're coming up to time, so feel free to interrupt with any questions there. But I want to finish this slide because it's pivotal for the rest of what we're going to do tomorrow and a couple of days. We talked about models. We talked about how they work. We talked about concepts like prompts, what you're sending, tokens, and all of that good stuff. At the end of the day, you're going to be sending stuff to the model. And it's important that you realize what it is that you're sending. Because this is the thing that you need to make decisions about. How confident are you about whoever receives that data and what they cannot do with that? Right? And when I say intellectual property, most of us will be thinking data, right? Like if we send our whole catalog of pictures to get embedded, well, we're sending those pictures. There's really no two ways about it, right? If we're sending a legal document to ask some questions about, we're sending the legal document. That's all data. However, there's some features in FileMaker 22 where we can ask it to generate a search for us or generate a SQL query against our database. In order to do that, we actually have to send it the data structure of our solution, because otherwise it wouldn't know what our tables are, what our fields are named, right? So in order to do that, that's sending our intellectual property. And I know we have plenty of clients that are protective of that, right? That don't take lightly to other people knowing how their solutions are built.
Mm-hmm. And they're not going to necessarily trust the promises.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what we'll do tomorrow is we'll dig into this deeper. We'll talk about that skill number one, that deployment options, to basically say we know what FileMaker gives us as potential providers of AI models, and we'll very quickly skip over things like OpenAI, Cohere, Anthropic, because they're commercial entities that I personally, and we have a blog post about that at Alliance, we call it ethical AI, our default stance, and we're not being dogmatic about it. Like it's not we're saying like we'll never use OpenAI, because really in your solution you can use 10 different providers depending on what functionality it is. If it's an innocent question, why wouldn't you use OpenAI? But if I'm sending data or structure of my database, I'll be a little more protective about that. Maybe I want to send that to a model that's under my control.
Yeah.
Right. So
they don't have the
that's what
greatest
we'll dig in
record.
tomorrow.
All right, absolutely. It'll be a good discussion. We do have one last question that was from earlier. What is the current limitation that prevents fine-tuning from being used on Linux/Windows servers with CUDA?
Can't speak to the exact technical limitation, but it is based on that MLX. MLX is like we'll explain CUDA and MLX tomorrow because that's really part of those deployment considerations. MLX is Apple specific framework, for lack of a better term, whereas CUDA is NVIDIA's framework. So the fine tuning is built to expect the MLX framework, and you just don't have it on NVIDIA hardware, which is what you would have to use on Linux and Windows. As to why that specifically is, can't really answer that one. If I had to guess, I think just engineering effort and time.
Makes sense.
Like it would surprise me very much if we don't get it eventually, right? But if they wanted to get something out of the door, this was the easiest lift for them.
That makes sense. Claris is owned by Apple. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Wim. Seriously, like this has been fantastic. It's greatly appreciated. A lot of people are saying thank you, which is very true.
One of these days, I'll learn to speak slowly.
I can't do that either, so I can't really help you there. All right, everybody. We will see you tomorrow with Wim continuing all of his awesome stuff and probably more cat shenanigans, to be honest, because mine was also bouncing around.
You didn't see me, but I was moving my keyboard like all over the place.
No, that's what I've been doing this whole time is I've been scooching mine around. Bye!